Silence becomes powerful the moment you stop using it as a reaction and start using it as a standard. When you walk away from chaos, disrespect, mixed signals, or emotional games, you're not trying to punish her, you're simply refusing to participate in something that diminishes your value. And that is exactly when the dynamic shifts. When she no longer has access to your energy, your presence, or your emotional availability, she begins to feel something she never expected: the loss of control. Not in a toxic sense, but in the sense that she can no longer predict you, influence you, or rely on you to respond the way you always did. Your silence exposes the illusion she was holding on to, the idea that you would always be there no matter how she acted. When a man pulls his energy back, a woman immediately notices, not always in obvious ways, but in subtle emotional waves. The good morning texts stop, the instant responses disappear, the emotional reassurance she once took for granted is suddenly gone. And for the first time, she has to face the reality that your attention was not guaranteed, it was given. This is where she starts to feel the gap she created. Silence forces her to reflect, not because she wants to, but because the shift in your behavior disrupts the comfort she was resting in. She starts asking herself questions she never asked before. Why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he chasing? Why is he okay without me? Those questions carry more weight than any argument, message, or explanation ever could. The reason silence hits harder than words is because it removes all emotional stimulation. When you stop feeding her the energy she is used to, she begins to feel a void that wasn't there before. Even if she acted like she didn't care, even if she pushed you away, even if she pretended you didn't matter, your absence exposes the truth. You were presence in her life. You were comfort, a consistency, a security, a source of validation, or simply an emotional anchor. And now she has to confront what life feels like without it. Silence makes her face what she tried to avoid: the reality of losing a man who actually cared. The longer you remain silent, the clearer it becomes that you were the stable force, the patient energy, the one who showed effort, loyalty, and emotional strength. And the deeper she feels it, because she realizes silence doesn't come from anger, it comes from self respect. A man who is confident enough to stay silent is a man who knows his worth. He doesn't need to argue, explain, or justify. He chooses peace over chaos, growth over drama, and dignity over attention. And that is when she truly starts to feel the weight of her own actions. Silence is not about hurting her, it is about healing yourself. And that is exactly why it impacts her the most. When you step back and give emotional space, something profound happens, not only in her mind, but in yours. Most men think distance pushes a woman further away, but in reality, the opposite is true. When it comes from a place of strength, acceptance, and emotional maturity, space is not abandonment, space is clarity. It removes the noise, the arguments, the overthinking, the mixed signals, and the emotional pressure that clouded everything. When you stop trying to fix things, stop trying to convince her, stop trying to hold the connection together with effort she's no longer matching, the emotional energy between you resets. She has nothing to resist, nothing to defend, nothing to run from. Silence opens the door to reflection, and reflection is what creates connection again. Women feel space differently than men. When you pull back, she doesn't immediately think you've moved on. Instead, she starts asking herself questions she wasn't forced to confront before. She thinks about the conversations, the arguments, and the moment she dismissed your feelings. She replays the choices she made, not because you reminded her of them, but because your absence removes the shield she was hiding behind. The emotional space you created gives her room to see what she overlooked, ignored, or denied. Without pressure, her defenses soften. Without your chasing, her mind opens. Without your presence, her heart starts to miss what it once felt safe to take for granted. Space also works on you. It calms your emotions, helps you detach from impulses, and reconnects you with your own standards. You stop reacting from fear and start observing from strength. You learn that you don't need constant communication to feel valuable. You begin to recognize that distance is not the enemy. Attachment without boundaries is. In that quiet space, you understand your worth and see the situation without the confusion of emotional intensity. Once you stop trying to force clarity, the clarity forms naturally. This emotional pause creates the perfect environment for perspective. She begins to reflect on how different things feel without your stability, your warmth, your communication, or your presence. Even if she doesn't reach out immediately, the space is working internally. The mind fills silence with meaning, and she fills it with memories of you. She may try to distract herself at first, but distractions fade and emotions rise. Space brings her back to the truth. She felt something with you that she can't feel with just anyone. And the deeper truth is this: emotional space doesn't create distance when you were genuine. It creates gravity. It pulls her back, not because you asked for it, but because your silence reveals the emotional contrast she can't ignore. The more peaceful you become in that silence, the more loudly she feels what she lost. Women may ignore messages, act distant, or pretend they don't care, but emotional absence hits in a way that no argument, no explanation, and no long message ever could. This is because women feel in waves. Their emotions rise, fall, and circle back, and silence is the one thing they can't escape. When you stop talking, stop reassuring, stop initiating, and stop giving her the emotional stimulation she was used to, she begins to feel the contrast between what was and what now is. Even if she acts confident on the outside, even if she shows no reaction, the emotional system inside her notices the shift. She may be able to ignore your words, but she cannot ignore the absence of your presence. Women are emotionally intuitive by nature. They feel energy, they feel withdrawal, they feel when a man disconnects from them on a deeper level. She might not say it, she might not show it, but she senses it. The texts that no longer come, the support that is no longer offered, the attention that has disappeared, it all creates an internal echo she cannot silence. Your presence once gave her comfort, stability, excitement, validation, or simply the sense that she mattered to someone who cared. When that presence fades, the emotional gap becomes real. She feels the absence more intensely than she ever felt the presence, because the mind often realizes value only in contrast. This is why silence more than explanations. Words can be debated, intentions can be misunderstood, but your absence cannot be misinterpreted. It tells the truth without speaking, it shows strength without force. And as time passes, she begins to feel the emotional weight of what she overlooked. She remembers your tone, your patience, your personality, your humor, your consistency, and the small things you did naturally. These memories rise to the surface in moments she doesn't expect, late at night, during quiet moments when she sees something that reminds her of you, or when someone new fails to match the depth she once had with you. When a woman loses access to a man who treated her well, she feels it like a void. Not immediately, not always dramatically, but deeply. She may distract herself, meet new people, post on social media, or act unbothered, but those behaviors are temporary shields. Real emotions break through once the excitement fades and the silence remains steady. She starts comparing every new interaction to the connection she had with you. She starts seeing the difference between attention and intention, between new energy and real connection. And that's when the regret begins to form, not from your words, but from everything your silence reveals. The truth is simple. Women feel absence more than pressure, more than persistence, and more than explanations. And the longer you stay silent, the more undeniable that feeling becomes. When a man finally chooses silence instead of chasing, defending, or explaining, something powerful begins to shift inside her. At first, she might try to play it cool, pretending nothing affects her, acting like your absence doesn't disturb her rhythm. But the longer you stay silent, the more that stillness starts echoing inside her mind. The questions she once confidently ignored now become louder, heavier, impossible to escape. She starts to replay everything: your words, your tone, the last conversation, the last time she felt you pull away. Because silence isn't the absence of communication, silence is communication. It tells her something about yourself. Respect your boundaries and your willingness to walk away from what no longer values you. And she feels it in ways she didn't expect. Your silence becomes the mirror she can't avoid anymore. It reflects the imbalance she once brushed aside. It shows her exactly how much she contributed to the distance between you. She notices the difference between when you were available and when you disappeared into your own world, and the contrast hits her harder than anything you could have said. When you were present, she might have felt secure, even comfortable enough to take you for granted. But when you withdraw, the space you leave behind becomes a reminder of how real your presence used to be. She begins to sense the emotional vacuum, the emptiness that only appeared because she stopped appreciating the energy you once poured into her. Your silence forces her to see the patterns she was blind to, the disrespect, the inconsistency, The push pull dynamic she thought you'd always tolerate. Now she realizes you're no longer playing that game. What makes silence so powerful is that it puts her face with something she can't manipulate the consequences of her own behavior. Words can be debated, twisted, dismissed, but silence is undeniable. It shows her that you've stepped back not out of anger, not out of insecurity, but out of strength. It shows her you're done forcing your value to be seen. That shift pulls her into a kind of emotional discomfort she can't ignore because for the first time she's left wondering whether she misjudged your breaking point. She never expected you to attack. She never thought the man who once cared so deeply could suddenly choose peace over proving himself. That unexpected change becomes her wake up call. And that's when she feels it, not just mentally, but emotionally. She feels the loss of your attention, the absence of your voice, the missing warmth she once took lightly. It's in the little things, the mornings without your messages, the nights without your presence, the arguments she can no longer provoke, the reassurance she no longer receives. Silence becomes a reminder of what she once had and what she might have pushed away. And the longer it lasts, the stronger it hits because silence is not punishment, it is clarity, and clarity is something she can't hide from. Sometimes the quiet you choose becomes the loudest truth she ever hears. There comes a moment when your silence no longer feels like absence. It starts to feel like strength. And that shift doesn't just affect you, it reaches her in a way she never expected. Because when you stop responding, when you stop chasing, when you stop fighting for someone who isn't meeting you halfway, your silence begins to show her what your presence was truly worth. She begins to feel the weight of everything she dismissed, everything she downplayed, everything she assumed you'd always keep giving. It's when you stop trying to prove your value that she finally starts to realize it. Suddenly, the things she overlooks start standing out in sharp clarity. The effort you once gave becomes more noticeable in its absence. The way you listened, the way you cared, the way you stayed consistent, she sees it all now, but only because it's no longer there. Your silence forces her to sit with the truth she avoided. You were the steady one, the loyal one, the emotionally grounded one. And she begins to understand that not every man will offer that kind of energy. She starts comparing what she had with what she sees around her, the games, the inconsistencies, the superficial connections. She realizes that what you gave wasn't ordinary, it was rare. And that scarcity hits her deeply because the longer you stay silent, the more she begins to understand that you weren't just another option, you were the difference. And now that difference is gone, she feels the loss in places she didn't know could ache. And it's not the silence itself that hurts her, it's what the silence represents, the loss of a man who was willing to give more than she knew how to receive. Silence also removes the illusion of control she once believed she had. When you were reaching out, expressing, initiating, she felt safe in the idea that you'd always be there. She thought distance was something she could dictate, something she could create and then erase whenever it suited her. But now it's your silence writing the story, it's your distance shaping the dynamic, and this reversal forces her to confront a reality she never imagined. She no longer holds the power she once relied on. She can't predict your next move, she can't trigger your reactions, she can't rely on the old patterns that used to pull you back in. That unpredictability unsettles her, not because she wants control, but because she finally understands what losing you actually looks like. And slowly, she begins to feel something deeper: respect. Not the type she gave casually, not the type she spoke about, but the type she felt. The kind of respect that only grows when someone stands firm in their value, even at the cost of walking away. Your silence teaches her a lesson she didn't know she needed: that a man who knows his worth and beg doesn't chase, doesn't compete for attention. He steps back and he lets his absence reveal what his presence meant. And that truth affects her more deeply than any argument, any explanation, or any confrontation could have. Sometimes the distance you choose becomes the lesson she can't forget. There comes a moment in every man's journey when he finally understands that peace is not something you ask for, it's something you create. And the deeper you move into your silence, the more you begin to realize that your emotional energy is something you get to protect, not something you are obligated to give away. This shift is powerful because it changes the entire dynamic of the connection. What she once took lightly becomes something she can no longer ignore. What she once thought was guaranteed suddenly feels fragile. And what she once believed she could control starts slipping through her fingers the longer you refuse to participate in the old cycle. Your silence stops being about her and becomes a reflection of your healing. You no longer feel the urge to explain what she refused to understand. You stop trying to convince someone who wasn't listening. You walk away from conversations that only drained you. Instead, your focus turns inward to your goals, your purpose, your self respect. And the more you invest in yourself, the more she feels the gap between who you were with her and who you are becoming without her. This is where the shift hits her hardest. She can't reach you in the same way anymore. Not because you're punishing her, but because you've grown past the place where she left you. She starts to feel the emotional distance in ways she didn't expect. At first, she might have thought your silence was temporary, something you'd eventually break once the emotion settled. But as time goes on, she realizes you're not waiting anymore. You're not holding on. You're not hoping for validation or closure or a sudden change of heart. You've accepted reality, and acceptance is something she can't manipulate. And that's when the emotional weight hits her. The man who once made her feel chosen is no longer accessible. The man who once poured into her is now pouring into himself. The man who once tried to bridge the gap is now walking in a completely different direction. Your silence becomes a mirror she can't avoid. She sees her behavior reflected back at her. Everything she took for granted, every moment she dismissed your effort, every time she assumed you'd stay no matter how little she gave in return, she begins to feel the consequences of her choices, not through arguments or confrontations, but through the one thing she never expected from you, the complete withdrawal of your energy. And this is where regret begins to take root, not because you forced it, but because she finally understands the gravity of what she lost. As you stay silent, you become a reminder of the kind of man she didn't know how to appreciate when she had the chance. She sees the difference between the version of you she knew and the version of you who has evolved. And that evolution creates a distance she can feel in her chest. Not because you're gone, but because she knows she can't follow you where you're going unless she becomes better too. Sometimes silence isn't the punishment, it's the proof that you've grown beyond who you were.